The Silver Crown by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 19, Otto the Provider. If there were no birds, there were no eggs. But with no birds to eat them, there were berries in fantastic abundance. Otto's rucksack was loaded with them. He dumped them out carefully on a clean, rocky part of the floor. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, wild cherries, and even some wild grapes, which were, however, too green to eat. "They don't fill you up too much," he said, "but they're good for dessert." Otto did not think highly of starvation rations, and he had several plans to do something about them. He said no more at the moment, but the berries were only a beginning. Still, they helped to make bearable the meatless and meager dinner, and there was a big pile left over for breakfast. The next day passed, and the second day began, with no sign that Ellen would be able to walk that day or even soon. They had breakfast early, and as soon as it was done and the dishes cleaned up, Otto climbed the steep rocky path out of the crevasse and into the woods. Ellen, watching him leave, was worried. In a few minutes she would put the crown on her head, and then she knew her troubles would become quite small and remote. But for the moment she felt she ought to worry. If their situation was not quite desperate, it bordered on it. Their meat was completely gone now, and while there was still a fair amount of bread left, with nothing else to eat, it could not last long. And then what? The worst of it was the knowledge that it was all her fault. Otto had gone down the crevasse wall easily and fearlessly, easily because fearlessly. But she had been a coward. Her nerve had failed, her terror had made her lose control, and now they were stuck. 3 days already, and who knew how many more. She worried about her Aunt Sarah. She must have received the postcard long ago. Or had she ever received it? If she had, was she searching for them? Not them. Aunt Sarah would know nothing about Otto. Aunt Sarah would know nothing of Otto. And how could she search without the vaguest idea of where to look? Or had she even been at home when the postcard arrived? She might have been traveling. She might have been traveling without any idea that Ellen was in trouble. At last, what about the man in black and the green hoods? They might, even now, be surrounding the cave, closing in from the woods, moving stealthily up the crevasse. She did not really think this was likely, however. The valley was so vast, and if their tracks had been found, surely they would have been caught before now. Each day that passed made discovery less likely, or so she must hope. She got her crutches and her crown, limped over to the ledge, and sat down facing the door. She put the crown on her head. When Otto returned just before lunchtime, she was still sitting there. This was the third time he had found her this way, sitting without any movement at all, a rapt, trance-like expression on her face, not smiling, but pale and serene, staring at the sunlit cleft of the back door, and listening to some beautiful sound he could not hear. When she saw him, she took the crown off, and Otto smiled broadly in anticipation. He was holding both hands behind his back. Now he held them out. In one hand, by the ears, a rabbit. In the other, by the tail, a squirrel. Ellen touched the rabbit with one hand. It was still warm, soft, and furry. She did not touch the squirrel, which was rather bloody. "Poor little things," she said. "Are they dead? How did you catch them?" "Poor little things will make us 4 good dinners. I got the rabbit with a deadfall. I got the squirrel with my knife." "What's a deadfall?" "A trap. You prop up a rock with 2 sticks. One holds it up, the other one is the trigger. I learned it from a hunting magazine. I put a little bit of carrot in a trigger sack. Rabbit tries to eat the carrot. Whomp! Down comes the rock. I've another one set, too. It's lucky we didn't eat the carrots. I took them a couple of days ago, just in case. You never even noticed. I've still got most of them left. You only need a little bit for bait." Ellen still felt she should protest killing the small furry creatures, but the thought of having meat to eat again weakened her conscience, and half an hour later, when the rabbit cleaned and skinned, was sizzling on a spit of green wood over the fire, the smell killed whatever qualms she had left. It tasted like chicken. "Only better," said Otto. "And tougher," said Ellen. And their food supply was replenished, temporarily at least. They had no assurance, of course, that this would continue, and indeed for the next 2 days, though he went out morning and afternoon, Otto came back empty-handed. To his annoyance, some bigger animal, probably a groundhog, raided one of his deadfalls, ate the precious bit of carrot, and managed to struggle out from under the rock. Otto took to roaming farther and farther as he hunted. Ellen's ankle was now definitely improving, The swelling had gone down noticeably, but more important, she could wiggle her foot from side to side without hurting so much. By the afternoon of the 7th day, she was actually able to half hop, half walk a few steps without the crutches. But a few steps were all, and she had to crawl back on her hands and knees. She was extremely proud of herself and waited impatiently for Otto to come back. He had been away since morning, hunting this day. For the first time, he had not returned for lunch, but had taken a scrap of cold meat and a piece of bread with him. Ellen had sat for hours wearing the crown, listening to the strange, distant music it produced in her mind, feeling the peace it brought her. Once during this time, when she was wearing the crown, she had a strange vision. Perhaps it was a dream. Possibly she fell asleep as she sat motionless on the ledge, half hypnotized by the bright doorway and the flickering sparkle of the wall. She felt suddenly she was looking at her father, straight into his eyes, and he was looking back at her but not seeing her. She could see his face only dimly, for it was in shadow, in a dark room, but she could not mistake his eyes. She thought she saw them speak, but could not hear what he said. Then, without wanting to, she looked away, at another part of the room, and she realized she was seeing through someone else's eyes, for she could not control the direction in which she looked, as though she could perceive other figures. She thought she could perceive other figures in the room, and high up in the dark ceiling, a very small, very dim light that was looking back at her father again, so close she could almost touch him. She tried to call out, but the instant she did, the whole vision flickered and vanished, as if she had tried to cry out in a dream and woke herself up instead. Since she was wearing the crown, she did not feel distressed at this, but wondered calmly if it was what it was she had seen, and through whose eyes. Her father was dead. Was he still, then, existing somewhere, seeing and looking the same as before? But then why in such a dark, gloomy chamber? Or were there, after all, such things as ghosts? Had she seen her father's spirit? Not only did the vision disappear, a minute later, when she removed the crown, her memory of it clouded, and in a few seconds she had forgotten it entirely. It was lonely in the cave, and she wished she had someone to talk to or a book to read. She wished Otto would come back so she could show him how she could walk. When Otto did return, it was almost dark, and he was so close to exploding that she had no chance to walk. He had made a tremendous discovery. "You remember the big stone building I saw from the cliff when we were walking back? Well, it was real. I found it. You said it was just a big rock. I said it must be just a big rock, but it isn't. It's a building as big as a fort. Does anybody live there? Kids, mostly boys, I think. It must be some kind of school or maybe a camp." "Did you ask them?" "No, I didn't go close enough. There's a high fence all the way around it, a very high fence with barbed wire on top about half a mile away from the building. On the front side, there's a big stone wall. But there must be a gate with a bell or something." "There is, in the front, but I didn't ring it." "Why not?" "I was scared." "Scared of a school? You would be too." Otto did not admit lightly to being frightened. There was something, funny about it. Something wrong. "You mean about the building?" "The building is almost black, with towers on it like a castle and hardly any windows. But it's not just that. There are these black paths like driveways all around the grounds inside the fence." "What's wrong with that? Most roads are black." "Wait. I was watching from the edge of the woods, and a bunch of kids came walking along the path. Not one of them ever said a word. They just marched in a straight line like dead people. And there was a man with them in black clothes. He was dressed exactly like the stranger." "You mean with the green stripes and everything?" "Yes, and the kids were dressed in black too. It's sort of a uniform." "The man. Was he the stranger, the same one?" "No, he was shorter and his face was different." "Where is this place anyway? How far away?" "That way, maybe 7 or 8 miles. Otto pointed downstream in the general direction of the crevasse. In the general direction the crevasse and the brook ran. "I'm not sure about the distance. It took me half a day to get there, but I was hunting. Coming straight back, it took about 2 hours, maybe less, but I was hurrying." This was the most puzzling development yet. It meant, or seemed to mean, that the stranger who had been pursuing them from behind had actually come from ahead of them. That is, if he did really come from the strange fenced-in place. It was barely possible, of course, but most unlikely, that the similarity in costumes was just a coincidence. Could this, then, be the headquarters they had talked about? "I wish I could see it," Ellen said. "Who do you suppose the children are?" "I think they're captives." "Captives?" "I don't think they can get out." Otherwise, why should there be such a high fence? Maybe to keep other people from coming in. That's what most fences are for, except in prisons. Maybe it's a prison or a reform school. I could get in, Otto said. I thought of it. Wire fences are easy to climb. You shouldn't go in, Ellen said quickly. Otto, please don't try. You were right to be